Athletes have individual differences and preference for the level of anxiety that is optimal. As you can see in the top right diagram, different athletes perform better in different optimal zones. So, for example, athlete A with a low eyes off has their best performance, whereas athlete B has a best performance in moderate eyes off, whereas athlete C has their best performance in high eyes off, which is the individual zones of optimal functioning. The athlete feels in full control, they have effortless performance, and they perform at their optimal levels of arousal. Doing the skills gives them pleasure and enjoyment, and they are focused and they feel very confident. So, for example, if you had Nick and Sarah aren't performing in their best eyes off, whereas Rachel is performing at her best eyes off because she's got the right level of arousal that's making her play, right level of anxiety which is making her play well. Hanin in 1986 suggested there's individual differences that people react to anxiety, and he also found that some elite athletes did well when anxiety wasn't high, but some did well when anxiety was high. Hanin's results found that each athlete has a different optimal level of anxiety, which means that they can play at their best. Optimal levels of anxiety isn't a certain point or threshold like in the inverted U or catastrophe theory, but is a band width, so it's wider. So related to this band, it is related to this band, but the athlete isn't psyching up, and they aren't either going over a threshold of arousal at any point, unlike the other theories. The player would be within or outside their preference for their zone of anxiety or eyes off. So Rachel is in her zone, but Nick and Sarah are outside of their zone. For example, a person with a low zone of function or low arousal will be an introvert, will typically do simple growth skills. Their stage of learning will be the cognitive associative phase, and they will be novice performers. Whereas a person with high zone of function or high arousal will be an extrovert, like Rachel, because she plays a team game. They will be able to complex fine skills like shooting and netball. They will be in the autonomous phase of learning, and they will be an experienced player. The positives of the eyes off theory are that it's supported by research. It is a better predictor than the inverted U theory, but the criticisms are that there's not an explanation of how eyes off develops, and it doesn't explain why best performances are more likely to be in the optimal zone. And finally, criticism is that situational personal factors can't always predict the optimal zone, like the task type or athletic experience. The implications for practice are that you can spot signs of arousal and state anxiety, and a coach could change the way he coaches to benefit in certain individuals. So, for example, sometimes arousal might need to be reduced or sometimes maintained or sometimes facilitated, or there needs to be more arousal in place. It can improve a player's confidence and how they see control. Anxiety, direction and intensity. So, for example, in practice, Nick's coach and Sarah's coach could make sure that there's more arousal there, and which will improve their confidence in those games that they struggle in. Anxiety, direction, and intensity. State anxiety is seen as facilitative or debilitative by a person based on how much control they see. So, for example, Nick and Sarah have debilitative anxiety, whereas Rachel has facilitative. and it gets or improves cognitive skills and strategies, which lets people see anxiety as facilitative. So this will be very beneficial to Nick and Sarah because they could change the way they see anxiety, which means they don't get as nervous, therefore they can perform better more easily. The peak flow theory. Rachel Jackson, 1995, page 138, said flow is a state of optimal experiencing involving total absorption in a task and creating a state of consciousness where optimal levels of functioning occur. This suits Rachel because she's performing at her optimal level. The four things are flow, which is skill but challenge; anxiety, which is challenge but fears level of skills; boredom, which is skilled but unchallenging; and low skill level, low challenge. If skill level exceeds the task demands, so if the task is too easy, the performer becomes bored, whereas if the task is too hard, the performer becomes anxious. How do you define the characteristics of flow? You need a skill or challenge balance. You need to merge action or awareness. There needs to be clearly defined goals, a clear or unambiguous feedback, total concentration on the skill being performed. There needs to be a paradox of control, loss of self-awareness, autolectic experience. There needs to be a loss of time awareness and a combination of emotional high and personal best performance.